Hello, it's ukulele time. I'm Ben Eagle, Reader's Advisory Librarian here at Carnegie-Stout, and also your ukulele instructor. Today, we're going to look at the C major scale. I'm going to teach you how to play it in a couple different ways, and I'm also going to explain why we're playing it. So we're going to look at just a little bit of theory. So you'll walk away with some exercises to work on and just a little bit of understanding about why we're choosing the notes we're playing. So it's just a little bit of the building blocks of theory so you can start analyzing your favorite songs and understand why we're playing what we're playing. Does that sound good? Okay, let's get started. As I promised, we're going to start with a little music theory before we get right into the exercises you're doing. So first off, we need to define some terms that I'm going to be using. Just a few on here. Interval. When I say interval, it's the distance you use in music between two pitches. So it can even be the same pitch, or it can be any other pitch. So from that note to that note. They all have different names. We're only going to look at one. For now, I just want you to understand that any of these are all intervals. So here to here, that's an interval. And it has a name. I'm only going to share the name of one particular interval, which is the octave, the next on the list. So an octave is the interval. That's the distance from one letter to the next of the same name. So as we know, the music alphabet just keeps repeating. After G, it starts over on A, and then it keeps going up. So you can have one letter, like a C here, and a C here. One at a lower pitch, and one at a higher pitch. So the distance between these two, from one to the next of the same name, is an octave. And that's important to know because we're going to learn a scale, and a scale takes place between the octaves. So next on the list is scale. And the scale is the division of the octave in a certain number of notes. So it's a set pattern. So between those two octaves, those two C's, is a certain set pattern, and that's a scale. And the type of scale we're learning today is the major scale in the key of C. Okay, and as we move up to the scale, as we go through the low to high, we're taking certain steps. And steps, you can think about it just as like steps you take. Steps in a scale is the distances we're using. And you're either taking a half step or a whole step with this scale. So a half step is just one note to the one right next to it. So all the frets on here are divided in half steps on the ukulele. So moving up one note at a time is all half steps. Okay, and I'll show you in a minute what a half step is on a piano keyboard. Okay, and then, so half steps are also called semitones. I'm just going to be calling them half steps and whole steps because that's what I see more often. And I think at this beginning stage, it's easier to remember steps than tone and semitone. So we got the half step. That's moving just one pitch up at a time. The whole step is skipping a note. So on a ukulele, it's if you're there, you skip one fret and go to the next. And I'll explain why that happens when we look at the keyboard. That's why I got the piano keyboard so you can kind of see how the notes are laid out there and how they're different on a string instrument like the ukulele. So a whole step, you skip one note. So this scale that we're going to do is a combination of whole steps. So you have whole step, and then you have half steps in there. So some whole steps and some half steps. Okay. Now, you'll have this worksheet to review just those terms. We're mostly gonna be looking at half steps and whole steps in the next part. The scale is what we're doing. The octave is what makes up the scale. And intervals is, an octave is the interval we're looking at. Okay. The piano keyboard you see on the screen, the C major scale uses all the white keys. So all those white keys from C to C, if you were going to play that on the piano, that would be a C major scale. Now, you'll see that it can be whole steps and half steps. So there's black keys on there too. If you go from C to the black key right next to it, that's a half step. But if you go from C to D, that's a whole step. Or D to the black key right next to it, that's a half step. Between E and F, there's no black key. And I'll explain how that relationship works on the ukulele. So there's from E to F, since there's no black key, that's a half step. F to G would be a whole step. F to the black key to the right of it would be a half step. Okay. So just to be clear, the black keys are either sharps or flats, and you can see those written on there. And those are named by the notes that are next to it. We don't have to worry about that right now. Just saying what they are, but the C major scale is only using white keys on a piano keyboard. And that relationship is already made up of whole steps and half steps because of where the black keys are at. But the piano keyboard is nicely set up to just do that C major scale. If you're only playing white keys, you're playing in the C major scale. Okay, we got that much. So now I'm going to look at the relationships between these notes. Okay, looking a little closer at the relationship between these notes, you can see there's the piano keyboard again. We get a formula of whole and half steps moving from one octave to the next, from C to C. So, in that blue box, the formula for the major scale is whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, or WWH, WWWH. So the W equals whole steps, the H equals half steps. On the piano keyboard, you'll see where that formula comes from. So C to D, we're skipping a black key. There's a black key between those two, so that's a whole step. D to E, we're skipping a black key, so that's another whole step. E to F, there's no black key between them, so it's a half step. F to G is a whole step, G to A is a whole step, A to B is a whole step, and B to C is a half step. So to memorize this scale, you could just think whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, or the WWH, WWWH. And you can see just the letters below. I put a little line over the E and F and the B and C because that's where the half step happens. So we have whole, or WWH, WWWH. Now that might seem like a lot to memorize, and I don't always think about the scale that way. If I'm starting on C, so I'm just going to do it on one string on the ukulele so you can see. We're also going to do the exercise across strings when I show you how to play the exercise. But if you're building the scale yourself, it's easier to visualize across one string. So you have your C. You can do whole step. So C, skipping a note, is a whole step. C to D, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Now what I think is easier is just knowing where that half step is, because if you know the rest are whole steps, if you just know that between E and F is a half step and B and C is a half step. So I think that is the most important thing to memorize at this step. Between E and F there's a half step, and between B and C there's a half step. So if you go through and you say the notes out loud, which I like to do, then you're starting to learn the notes on the fretboard. You have C, D, E, those were all whole steps. E to F is a half step. So I have C, D, E, F, half step. G, A, B, C. So the only half steps I did were between E and F and B and C. So again, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Okay, so that's how you make that scale. And I was showing you the piano keyboard so you can visualize that it's all the white notes on the piano, but that's where they get that layout. And then on the ukulele, one row, you can think about that as like a piano keyboard. So, except on a string instrument, then you can play them at the same time to get that harmony. That's how it's laid out. On a piano keyboard, you can play them at the same time too, but on a ukulele, you can't play two notes on the same string at the same time, so you have to have them across strings. Anyway, getting ahead of myself a little bit there. So we have the relationship. WWH, WWWH. Or the main takeaway I want you to have is remember between B and C and E and F are the half steps, sorry. Half steps are between E and F and B and C. So, now to put this in tab is the next part. So you can have practical exercises to do. But it's important to know this going forward, because as we do other scales, we can apply this same formula to figure out any other scale you want to. So you don't have to look up a scale every time you want to know it. Once you have the formula, you can build any scale, which we'll do in other lessons. But now we'll look at some tabs so you at least understand quickly how we're going to play the scale across one string and how we can play the scale going down on strings. Okay. Also, as I promised, we have some exercises you can work on. And I would just practice these regularly, because not only is it building that theory knowledge for you to understand the scale, but also playing these scales is just going to help your fingers and get that fine motor movement and that muscle memory, and just get your playing better of picking these single notes. So knowing these scales are just good warm-up exercises. So on the screen, you'll see a diagram I have first. That diagram is just showing all the notes in the scale, and it's on the ukulele neck rather than a keyboard as I showed before. So you can see the circled notes. The C is where you start and where you end. And like the tab, it's kind of like looking at the neck upside down. So as you can see, the A string is the top and the G string is towards the bottom. So the G string, which is towards your head, on the diagram it's towards the bottom. And the A string, which is towards your feet, on the diagram, it's at the top. And that's to go along with how we read tab. Once you're used to looking at things this way, it makes perfect sense. So That diagram, it's showing all the notes. It's not showing you a particular order to play in. It's just giving you a visualization of where all those whole steps and half steps are. So that's going across strings. I'll show you the scale on one string next. But first, usually it's better to think about where you're playing in these kind of boxes. So you can assign your fingers. So you can play this scale with 3 fingers. Okay, so C to C. I'll do the tab example now, which we'll also see corresponds to the lower blue note to the higher blue note, the C to the C, the circled note. So in the tab, in the brackets, that's where the C notes are. So that's the key that we're playing in, and that's where you'd start and end your pitches. So playing the tab, we have 0, 2, 0, 1, 3, 0, 2, 3, 2, 0, 3, 1, 0, 2, 0. So slower. On the C string, you have 0 and 2. E string, 0, 1, 3, 0, 2, 3. And then it plays the scale backwards. So one more time, I'll do it very slow. And you can either pick with your thumb on the C string, and then your other fingers. If you remember from the finger picking exercise, it's good to assign your fingers certain strings. But also you can alternate between your pointer and middle when you're picking passages like this, when you're going up and down in a scale. So you could do pointer, middle, pointer, middle, pointer, middle. Or if it's easier at this point, you can pick it all with one finger. Eventually though, I'd try something alternating those just so you can get that technique down too. So that's how I'm going to pick this. So we have and that's the scale going back and forth. So I'll stop on those notes in the bracket so you can hear where they end and start. So sounds complete there. Then backwards. Okay, so not only would I memorize that, I would also think about where those half steps are. So where the E and F are, and the B and C. So you could say it out loud as you go through it. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Okay, that's going through the scale in the box form. The next example. Now the G on the ukulele is higher than the other pitches. It's unique to the ukulele that way. The guitar doesn't do that. So, as you start on the C string, each string gets higher, but this C string is higher than this string. So this next example that uses the open G just shows you where that note is in the scale. So instead of playing the G here on the 3rd fret, 2nd string, you're playing the G here because it's the same exact pitch. Okay, so when you go through that, you have and how I do that is I hit that G with my thumb. So again, I'll play all the other notes with my fingers. So that one might take a little practice to get that thumb down. just want to work on getting that down. And again, like chords, I'm playing with the very tips of my fingers. Okay. My last example is doing the same scale all the way on one string. So it's showing you that you can play this scale in many ways. So on the ukulele, you can play the same note in a couple different places. As we saw with that G note, that the open string and the G here are the same note. So we can play that same scale all the way on one string. So starting with that C. And before I even look at the tab, remember, because we know the half step is between E and F and B and C, if you say the alphabet, you can do the scale without the tab. So you have C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Now the tab shows you the same thing. Again, the brackets are where the C note is. So 0, 2, 4, 5, 7, 9, 11, 12. And then it's backwards. So that's the C scale on one string. Okay, that's all there is to the C scale. But that's the building block for a lot of different things that we'll be doing. It's the building block for pretty much any other music theory that comes after that. So if you learn this scale and you know the formulas, then you can play this in other keys, which I'll show in another lesson. So for now, what to get out of this lesson, the main takeaways, I want you to know that the half steps are between B and C and E and F. It's whole steps between the other notes of the scale. So we have E and F and B and C as the half steps. The other takeaway is just to memorize this scale and know where the notes are on there. So you can go through these exercises, not only memorize the different tabs and go back and forth, use them as warm-ups when you're playing before you start playing a song. With the very tips of your fingers, and alternate pick with your right fingers, or do any other technique we've worked on. Either using your thumb or just one finger and thumb. But it's important to use those as warm-ups. So you have the scales to warm up with, and you'll have them memorized. And then you'll know how to build the scale. Also, I would say the notes out loud when you go through the scale. So, half steps between B and C and E and F. And having those scales memorized as warm-ups. It's going to get you in good shape for moving forward. So, with that, I think we'll wrap this up. So, this has been Ukulele Time with Ben. Bye.